Hello everyone, Nathaniel Gavronsky, and I'm reporting to you outside of Congressman David Loebsack's office in downtown Iowa City. This video is going to be in response to the CARES Act that passed the House of Representatives this past week. Now, out of the 4 House Representative members in the U.S. Congress from Iowa, 3 of them, 2 of which were Democrats, voted against this bill. It has been signaled by Mitch McConnell to be dead on arrival in the Senate, and even if it did pass the Senate, the President of the United States has promised no support and would veto any bill that came to his desk from this legislation. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with absolutely no plans for additional stimulus or aid packages to anyone until at least June. Now, this should not be a political issue. However, it's been made a political hotbed for problems in policy. The CARES Act was looked at as being a progressive liberals, Democrats' wish list, and Republicans said that it had absolutely nothing to pertain to the actual virus response and helping everyday people with problems associated with the coronavirus. So here's what I can tell you. I'm going to be breaking down the information from a little bit what the bill says, and then what the actual economic numbers are by the Federal Reserve and the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan, non-political office. It just looks at each bill and says, this is where we are at. Okay? I'm going to use a lot of numbers from the state of Iowa and from the state of New York. These are the 2 states I work primarily in, and I have those numbers readily available. Okay. So before this whole pandemic took hold, in the state of Iowa, for example, there were 6,300 restaurants and bars. Now, that's the second largest private employer in the entire state. It employed over 155,000 workers in urban areas and rural areas alike. Now, because of this pandemic, half of those restaurants and bars are going to be closing permanently. In fact, here in Iowa City, the Union Bar is closing permanently and will not reopen. The largest bar in Iowa City, which has been a staple of Iowa City culture and independent music scene, is gone. One of the largest non-university employers in the city is for college students specifically is now gone. Now, this is not just an urban city problem. A lot of these restaurants and bars are in rural areas, and they are closing, and there's no new jobs that are going to be available for these workers to go back to once everything has been completely reopened up. And we're getting to that place. Here in Iowa, before June, we're going to have everything opened up, at least to like 50% capacity. However, the problem is that even under 50% capacity, no business, especially the small businesses, they're not going to be bringing in enough income to pay off their utility bills and past due rent. For example, in New York City, there are 85 million people. 5.5 million of those people rent their homes. In April and May, over a third of all Americans did not pay their rent. Now, that's just the housing rentals. That's not including the commercial rentals. So you're looking at a massive amount of rent that's not being paid, both for housing and for small businesses. So the government's response was this. They did an additional program for unemployment, which gave individuals an additional $600 on top of normal unemployment benefits. And then they gave businesses loans that, for payroll purposes, would be grants, and anything else that was used would be at a very, very low interest. But here's the problem. Most workers took the unemployment because it gave them more than their salary did, and the businesses can't really use that money for rent and utilities because it becomes an interest loan, and they still have no revenue. So you're paying interest on a loan with no revenue. It doesn't really work so well. So we look at a couple of other things, is that a lot of these businesses that got the PPP program, see that 74% of $350 billion, the loans were under $150,000 each loan, right? The problem is over half of that money went to businesses that had over $1 million in reserve, in holdings, while many of the small businesses actually didn't get anything at all because we have been promoting local banking, small banking across the country, and if you didn't have a relationship with a larger bank, you didn't have access to the money even if you qualified for it. Now, with many of the people who qualified for the additional unemployment programs, in a gig economy where a lot of people work on 1099s, they didn't qualify for unemployment. They couldn't get even the basic unemployment on top of the $600 additional money that was promised to each individual. And like the president said, most people living in states where the infrastructure for unemployment wasn't very good qualify for it but haven't received it. I know several people in New York City that have not received unemployment that they qualify for since April. And people in Iowa, there's hundreds. There's plenty of businesses around the state that qualified for the PPP program but aren't going to be able to get any money from it because they don't have access to a large bank that they had been banking with that actually have access to the program. So even Mark Cuban acknowledged that this program has not worked well and it needs to be readdressed. The CARES Act in Congress did not talk about any of this. They want to be able to send $3 trillion out to states for them to use at their discretion, but it doesn't have any specific language on to how they're supposed to be spending this money. And some states, that's probably not a good idea because they are so backlogged on past debt and bills that they might just try to kick it down the road and pay off the new stuff years later when it has snowballed into a problem that we can't bail out. The best solution for this, I believe, is going to be to cancel the rents for people, businesses, and rent and housing rent units, and then move the mortgage payments, either cancel them outright and bail out the banks at the end, or kick the mortgage payments to the end of the loan. Because if we have all these places foreclosed, we're not going to be able to have any credit. McDonald's wasn't able to get loans for payroll in 2008, and they make billions of dollars. So what is going to happen to everyone else? If McDonald's can't get a loan, you're not going to be able to get a loan. So there's not going to be any new home sales. As home sales drop off, you're going to have existing homes that are for sale to also lose value. As banks can't make any loans, people can't buy loans, get loan houses, the property values are going to drop. As property values drop, state income revenues drop from property taxes. As property tax values drop, the people who need help can't get it, and as values of properties drop below the mortgage note, banks are forced into foreclosure. We're going to have what happened in 2008 happen 10 times over. Here's what the Federal Reserve and the Congressional Budget Office say. They believe that we are going to have a 10% to 12% contraction in the second quarter of 2020. The outlook for the third quarter can still be up in the air depending on what the government does. But everyone is for sure that we are going to have, and we have, the numbers have shown, 36 million people unemployed. That's over 26%. That is way more people unemployed than at any time during the Great Depression. And this is something the government has not really addressed, not the Republicans or the Democrats. And a lot of this stuff has to originate in the House because the House holds the purse. And so if they're not going to address these issues, they're not going to be addressed at all. And that's what we're running into. We're running into a lot of people who are going to not be able to pay their rent because they can't pay current rent plus back due rent when most of them aren't going to have a job to go back to. People who are making $40,000 or less, a majority of those people specifically are unemployed. And 60% of all the businesses that do reopen say they're not going to be able to hire back everybody if they survive themselves. So you can kind of see where the numbers are going here. The people at the lowest end of the income spectrum are going to get nothing because the Democrats are showing so much support for 68 times did the CARES Act talk about marijuana and pot. Now, regardless of where you stand on marijuana, the fact that you're giving more support to those types of businesses than businesses that employ a wide variety of people, not only in Washington, California, and Colorado, but in places like Iowa and Missouri, Nebraska, Arkansas, South Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey. A lot of places don't have recreational or medical marijuana laws that allow people to do business in those states. So you're only focusing on winners and losers with that type of bill. That's not the way to do this. The only way I see that we're going to be able to make it through this with everyone not losing everything is you're going to have to completely cancel out the rents. Once you cancel out the rents, you can either bail out the mortgage title owners at the end of the whole thing with one check, or you push all the mortgage payments out to the end of the loan, expanding every single loan out for another 6 months to a year. And this money is just owed later. And then you cut that interest down by 0.25% for the duration of those loans. So that way the money that we do give out to the economy is going to actually stimulate it. Because when you look at 51% of an individual's food budget going into restaurants and bars, that's a huge amount of money that's not going to have anywhere to be spent. Yeah, they can shop at grocery stores, but a lot of people, especially disabled people and retired people who still need to get income some way on top of Social Security, they work at some of these small restaurants and bars. They work as dishwashers, they work as waiters, they work as doormen, cooks. Some of the lifebloods of some of our smaller towns are these little restaurants that people work at, and those are the ones that are most likely not going to reopen, because you're not going to give them specifically the aid they need. When you give companies that have $1 million in revenue all the loans that they want when they didn't need them, but small businesses that have less than 300 employees or 20 employees at the most, they don't have access to it. By canceling the rents outright, you give them reprieve, because you can't pay current rent and back rent with that. And if you only open 50% capacity, ask any restaurant owner. You can't operate a business and pay your utilities and your workers and your rent at only 75% capacity. You have to be able to have full nights, or you're not going to make it. This is make it or break it for the entire country right here, because if we lose all these jobs, they're not coming back. 80,000 workers in Iowa have already lost their jobs. 60% of all those small businesses aren't going to reopen, including many of those small restaurants and bars in the areas where there's the fewest amount of jobs that can replace them. I'm asking every single one of you to address your member of Congress in the House of Representatives, either Republican or Democrat, and ask for a couple of specific things. You want a specific bill that handles just COVID, just how to deal with rent payments, mortgage payments, utility assistance, and just expenditures relating to the COVID outbreak, specifically on essential workers, infrastructure, ways of getting meatpacking plants to be a more safe environment for their workers, a way to make sure stores have food on their shelves, to make sure that certain supplies like toilet paper, sanitary supplies is readily available. That's the type of bill we need. Adding billions and trillions of dollars for things that do not pertain to COVID are not going to help anyone, because the money, we can't guarantee it gets there. I'm asking everyone to reach out to your member of Congress. If you write to me and give me your zip code, I will give you your House of Representatives office phone number, their LA staff member, and their scheduler's email address, and I will also give you their DC and their local office, and I will also send you your state senators and your federal senators' information, so you can address this at both the state and the federal level. I will help anyone who want to reach out to any governor in the country. I know a good chunk of them. I will help anyone to reach out to these people to say, this is what we specifically want. And governors have a lot of influence at their federal level delegates to Congress and the Senate. And you should have your voices heard as well, because if they don't understand the actual plight of people en masse, they aren't going to be able to produce a working bill and a working solution for everyday Americans. Because that's what matters to me, is everyday Americans being able to get what they need. Because the billionaires and millionaires will be able to shoulder this burden a little bit easier. But if we don't create demand, we're not going to be able to build up an economy, and everyone, including the millionaires and billionaires, will lose out. And when they completely lose out, there's no job creators. So we've got to pull together with everybody. This is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. And we came together as one nation to become independent. We united when it came to keeping our country free in 1812. We cleansed some of the biggest scar on our history during our Civil War, and we have liberated Europe twice in the 20th century. We need to be able to come together to help ourselves this time, and the people at the bottom, because they're the most vulnerable. They're the ones who had the least amount of resources to shoulder this, and that's the responsibility of the government right now, when the government's the reason why they're unemployed. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Reach out to me. I will help you in any way I can with getting a hold of your state and federal officials. We're going to get through this. The lockdowns are lifting. Economic activity is starting to come back up, but we're not going to be able to get through it entirely unless people have their rents paid off or pushed back, because there's no demand otherwise if everyone's scared of losing their homes. Thank you.